So the question that often comes up is simply put to the effect, what else do I need to do? Okay, so Jeff, you're the chiropractor. What else do I need to do? Or do I have an issue where I need to see a physiotherapist, or where I need to see a massage therapist, or when I need to see an osteopath? And what other kind of things, can I do to take care of myself so that, things are going to be going, well for you, not just short term, but really for best possible long term. And it's worth me, taking a little bit of a step back here because in the, relative simplicity of the question, what else can I do to take care of myself? It is an opportunity to show how all of these different groups, these professions, really should be working together to get the best possible kinds of outcomes for people. Now, it sometimes can and does get a little bit tricky, and there are a lot of gray zones and a lot of overlap. And just because I may offer, my opinion, even though I come from a historical or traditional sense, this is, what the traditional boundaries of each of them were. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to agree, but nevertheless, okay, let's, go ahead, let's put it out there. So the first thing is simply realizing that we are dealing with different kinds of physical injuries. And so for different kinds of physical injuries, as a consequence, guess what? You're probably going to need different kinds of care, depending what you have going on. And guess what? It's very possible that you can have more than one thing going on, meaning that there is not going to be a one-size-fits-all solution. And just because you may be experiencing the same symptoms as somebody else does not always mean that that's going to be the exact same solution that you need. So firstly, from a traditional sense and standpoint, I'll speak on physiotherapy. So physiotherapy, the principle and the idea here is that you have muscle imbalances. And there's way more to it than that, but you have muscles that are either too tight or more appropriately, they are not activating, they are not working right. The consequence of that is that you have imbalance of your neuromuscular system, which is going to then contribute towards injury. It's going to contribute towards pain. It's going to contribute towards any number of different kind of sensations there. So what's the thought and the principle here? The thought and the principle is that we need to strengthen and we need to rehabilitate the muscles. In physiotherapy, traditionally, it would have been when a person had experienced a physical injury. So you've got the physical injury, you need to go through the rehabilitation. You need somebody to show you what kinds of specific activities do you need to do in order to A, rehabilitate your injury, B, make it stronger, and C, stabilize it so that it's not going to be an ongoing functional issue into the future. Now that's the tradition. And then you can add into that, because if it is the quote muscle problem, and then also asking the question, what controls the muscle? That's where then you start to see a little bit of overlap into the neurology. So you have neurorehabilitative physiotherapists, but also then when you get into the preventative care side of the equation. And this is one of the reasons why great many physiotherapists incorporate Pilates, functional rehabilitation, yoga, physical movements. Why? Because they know this is how you protect and you preserve keeping your body working the way that it's supposed to from that muscle perspective. However, there can be other things besides when and where the muscles tighten, and this is ultimately getting back to that question, what causes muscles to get tight in the first place? Now here's where you're going to have the introduction, the evolution of similar but different categories. So these are going to be your osteopaths, and these are going to be your chiropractors. So again, I'm not an osteopath by trade, and I'm going to speak of it from the traditional standpoint, recognizing there is a huge amount of overlap and gray zone between the two again. In the past, osteopathy was founded on the principle that stagnated blood flow to the muscles, to all of the organs and the tissues of the body is going to result in their, abnormal function. And if you have an abnormal function, it's going to relate to any number of different, pathologies or diseases or diseases that you could possibly think of. And so by incorporating active stretches, long lever manipulations, gentle work even too, and this is where a lot of osteopathy has gone in more recent times, is using gentle stretching, but also engaging the craniosacral rhythm. So there's a lot of people who are working on the relationship between the base of the skull and the base of the tailbone, because you've got the circulation of fluid around the nerves there that in turn influences how blood flow is going to be manifesting and working throughout the entire body. So large amount of osteopathy is done through here. Now, what's interesting, at least, if you listen to my accent, despite me being in Australia, I understand osteopathy is something different. You see, in the US and Canada, osteopathy is more akin to a medical doctor, but one who is incorporating a few more different natural therapies in addition to these general kinds of mobilization techniques that we've just described. But here in Australia, it's interesting because somewhere along the line, something got crisscrossed a little bit there. And so some of the different methodologies and the techniques that in Australia osteopaths use is actually more closely akin to what I know as a chiropractor. Very interesting. But nevertheless, okay, well, what's the traditional difference? Well, the traditional difference, again, is that osteopathy was predominantly using more long lever stretches, muscle mobilizations, activities like this. When the chiropractor was looking particularly at the spine and doing a short lever or a specific, if you would, a push, a thrust, an impulse of some kind in order to get movement occurring through the spine. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, in the chiropractor's viewpoint, what they're looking for is they're looking for conditions not of the muscles, but of the joints, particularly where two bones come together in the spine. Well, why does that matter? Well, it's because your spine is your neural conduit. It is your electrical supply between the brain to all of the things in the rest of your body that animates and lets it move and work the way that it is supposed to. And so some of the early procedures, yes, they were very, very similar, and you had a lot of crisscrossing back and forth between osteopaths and chiropractors because guess what? Many of them were the same individuals and they had dual degrees. So you couldn't distinguish necessarily one from another, but nevertheless you had the evolution of a number of different techniques, but two very different but interrelated schools of thought. One was that you were doing these different kinds of movements, procedures to help with blood flow. And the other saying, okay, no, it's to improve nerve flow. Now the reality as we understand it today is that it's a little bit of both. But the question remains, okay, well, what's the underlying condition? Because if you ask an osteopath or a chiropractor, the answer is not muscles. They're going to be describing conditions of joints. And a lot of people think, okay, these are conditions of bones. You're going to make bones move. The bone itself is not the issue. It's the space between the joints. We're talking about ligament injuries. And not the kind of ligament injuries per se where something has grossly dislocated or shifted so off course, but also not just the minor little tweaks. What we're talking about here are very tiny, but nevertheless very significant injuries to the ligament structure that causes it to lock outside of its normal position and its normal range of motion. See, if you've got any joint in the body, I don't care if it's in your back, your neck, your little toe, it's supposed to move something like this within a normal range of motion. Too much motion and it's going to be doing something like this, in which case you might need some kind of treatment to stabilize the ligaments, like a prolotherapy, or you may work with the physiotherapist to strengthen the surrounding muscles so even though the ligament is a little bit more loose and slack, that it's able to keep it within your body's control. But what we're talking about here is we're talking about injuries that caused the joint to shift a little bit, it was offset, but as a consequence of that injury, it's not quite able to come back the way that it should. It's gotten stuck there, if you would. And as a consequence, it has an altered range of motion or an altered orbit of flexibility. It'll move this way, no problem, but then the other way, it's not going to come back. The issue with that then is because the body's not able to move the way it is supposed to, and again, this is not a muscle issue, but what it will do is it will actually recruit the muscles, causing tight muscles as a consequence in order to compensate for that joint condition. And guess what? You can start to experience many of the exact same symptoms, problems as you would on the other side, but guess what? Completely different cause. So one of the very important things when people are looking for resolutions for what they have going on is having a proper understanding what is the true nature of your condition, and then who's the most appropriate person to be seeing. And again, you're going to have in the modern era a lot of back and forth. It's going to be a lot of gray as opposed to people who are purist in one camp, purist in another. Me, for example, I'm an upper cervical chiropractor. My focus is in what's happening with the joint alignment of the joints in the upper part of the neck because of how they influence the upper part of the brain stem, the nerves that control the head, the face, the brain, the shoulders, all of that stuff. But nevertheless, there can be other conditions that are going on. And as a consequence of this, it's important to know what kind of treatment you need to be. So I may prescribe some basic neck stretches, basic neck mobilization, but guess what? I'm not an osteopath. I'm not a physiotherapist. They would understand these things an awful lot better than I would. And so guess what? When that time comes, okay, we may need to refer you here. So in the longest possible way, and this is really the point that I was wanting to make in the course of, having this little discussion here. It's that, what can I do to keep everything working and moving as well as possible? Number one is physical exercise. Physical movement of your body. Full stop. Weight bearing. You got to enjoy it. I will say that too. Walking, going to the gym, running, hiking, rowing, cycling, any training. If you enjoy doing do it. But what you need strong muscles on your spine. If you sit on a couch, if you sit in front of the TV or your computer all day, slumping, slouching, all of this stuff, guess what? The muscle's going to get weak. And if the muscle gets weak, the result of that is that you are more susceptible to injury of all varieties, muscle injuries and ligament injuries. So number one that trumps anything else is keeping your physical body moving. And guess what? You might need and benefit by having a trainer, somebody to help facilitate working the muscles, but you don't need any professional to tell you to go and how to walk and how to train. If you need to rehabilitate an injury, that's different, but you can do these things on your own. So you got to have the intrinsic strength. Number two, you've also got to have flexibility. You see, what I find is that in my own practice, when I'm, doing diagnostic imaging, I'll look to see, okay, how much degenerative arthritis does a person have? And that gives you a sense of how long the injury has been there. And I will see some people who are absolutely riddled with arthritis. And they say, oh yeah, I'm a little bit stiff in the morning, that's about it. And then I see other people where they've got a sliver of that, and yet they're in absolute agony all of the time. What's the difference? I've realized that the difference is their internal flexibility. You see, when you have no flexibility, you've lost it. You haven't been stretching or engaging your body the right way. Things contract, and your margin of error shrinks. But when you have your normal range of flexibility, you have your margin of error. So these people don't experience the same kinds of discomfort that other people do. So if you want to prevent injuries, you need to be strong. And if you want to be feeling well, you need to be flexible. So these are two different kinds of activities. Flexibility then, this is functional movement. This is yoga. This is Pilates. This is Tai Chi. This is Qigong. This is anything that's engaging, getting your body simply put to move fluidly. This could be swimming. We'll throw that in there too. So strength exercises, stretching exercises, very, very important, because guess what they do? They keep you out of the physiotherapy, the chiropractor, and the osteopath as much as possible. And guess what? That's what we want. One of the great chiropractors in the past, his name was Weldon Munsey, he said, I'm happy to adjust you when you need it, but I'm twice as happy when I don't. That's what we want. We want you to be well, where you are not depending on us to just have to keep putting bits and pieces back together every few days just so that you can get by. No, something is very, very wrong. You should be strong, you should be independent. And then yes, okay, if and when you did tweak the muscle, you did tweak the joint, because guess what? We live on a planet with time, gravity, and stress. You can't cure these three conditions, not without causing many more problems. And in addition to that, because life is not meant to happen in a bubble, yes, it's possible that you could be out doing your training or doing something and, oh, darn it, you injured yourself, but guess what? What was the alternative? The alternative was for you to sit back and do absolutely nothing. Well, guess what? That would have caused even more problems. So if and when you are taking good care of yourself, if you need any kind of procedure, whether it is needing to see the chiropractor, the physiotherapist, or whether you even had a medical emergency that means you got to go to the hospital, the mega factor that influences your ability to make your recovery is based on the quality of your health going into the procedure, not what you did after. It's how good were you going into that procedure is going to make that biggest difference right there. So in this way, I hope you understand, there's a lot of moving pieces that go into this equation. Okay, do I need to see this person, need to see that person? Really, best world, what we would have is we would have like a mega clinic of sorts where you have a team working on you. You get assessed first, okay, by the chiropractor. The chiropractor has a look at you and says, okay, is everything functional and moving at the joints the way that it's supposed to be? If the answer is no, okay, you need a bit of a tune-up and a bit of an adjustment. If the answer is yes, great, guess what? You don't need an adjustment. So let's have you see the physiotherapist right now, and they're gonna make sure that all the bits and pieces are working and moving the way that they should be. And we can also work with the osteopath right here to make sure that the fluids, all of that is circulating as well as it can be as well. The difference between what's called quality flow, quantity flow, if you would. And so by doing these things, and then by having you do all of the things that are necessary to preserve your health and well-being at the highest possible level through your physical exercise, which is going to include your stretching, strengthening, and then also just a bit of general relaxation, not pushing it too hard at any given time and letting yourself enjoy and play and have a little bit of fun. That then is ultimately how, no matter who you are working with, you can get the best quality or best possible chance of success for best quality results.